Hi, we're reviewing the episode entitled, and Jeff has just discovered something very interesting about YouTube in this episode.
I have?
Yes, about us.
I just said was that when you search homicide heartbeat, then like the sixth result on the first page is a link to this very video that we're now doing.
Ooh, there you go, folks.
In case somebody happened to be searching for it right now, you could encounter this live review of the episode. Modern technology, folks. So yeah, this is Homicide Heartbeat, which was the 5th episode of Season 4 of Homicide, even though it was actually aired as the 7th one on December 8th, 1995. It was written by Kevin Arcady, or Arcady, however you say that, from a story by Tom Fontana and Henry Brommel, with plenty of motivation or inspiration from Edgar Allan Poe, and was directed by Bruno Kirby, who some of you may know as an actor.
I screen capped his name because he was in that episode. That was the guy that basically could have popped
the
off.
Gas Man.
Yes, the Gas Man. Yes, that's it.
He was the Gas Man. So he enjoyed his. He had worked with Barry Levinson before he was in The Gas Man, which was part of the reason he got cast for that. And he enjoyed his time working on Homicide so much in that part that he came back to direct this episode. And so what happens? Well, glad you asked. Lewis and Kellerman arrive at a scene where 20-year-old student Cindy Fuller has been found strangled. Cindy's friend would be a nice word for it, like fellow
euphemism.
Fellow heroin addict, tells the detectives that she freaked after selling her body to Boomer Mason for some heroin.
Oh.
The detectives interview Mason in the box and ask him why Cindy was found dead in his drugstore apartment. He has no valid alibi, and Lewis tells Kellerman they cracked the case. In his office, G tells Munch and Howard that Lewis and Kellerman have unearthed a 10-year-old crime and tells them to take over the case. According to Mason, who gave information as part of a sentencing deal, there is a body buried in a basement. Bayless spills the beans to Russert that Pembleton's wife is pregnant. Word gets out, and slowly, one by one, the detectives congratulate Pembleton. Pembleton is furious and tries to track down Bayless, who betrayed him. Munch and Howard head to the basement in question and search for a ghost and find a skeleton in the walls. The skeleton is of a man named Eugene that was reported missing 10 years ago. Eugene was also a known drug peddler. G tells Munch to get more information and mark this case on the board as blue. That is obviously for cases that are old but are still open. An unusually happy musical Munch tells Howard that he is changing his womanizing ways and is in love with his new girlfriend, Dr. Alyssa Dyer. Soon after telling Howard this, Munch can be seen sleeping with Dyer's roommate, who is a cop. Munch later regrets doing so and avoids Dyer the following days, paranoid, thinking that she is on to him. Munch and Howard soon realize their suspect in the 10-year-old case is a poet, or babbling idiot, as Munch calls him. Munch finds out that suspect Joseph Cardero is more than just a poet. He's a drug dealer, and he's obsessed with the work of Edgar Allan Poe. The detectives interrogate Cordero in the box, with Poe's trademark beating heart playing on a tape recorder. Cordero won't succumb to this and refuses to confess to killing anyone. Back at home, Cordero begins to suffer the same paranoia that Poe himself felt in one of his writings. The guilt gets to him, and Cordero seals himself in a wall in his basement. This episode ends with Munch approaching Howard with a battered face. Munch took Howard's advice and told his girlfriend that he slept with a roommate. Munch is not fazed that his girlfriend hit him. In fact, he is now even more attracted to her. So that's the basic recap.
Why did... First of all, this was the first episode in which we saw the tape recorder. The first episode that I noticed that we saw the tape recorder. But so was it just playing that beat, that heartbeat sound?
Yeah.
Why?
Because Munch thought it would help get Cordero to confess.
And they could hear it through there.
Yeah, it was being played through through the wall.
Oh, okay.
So let's see what Mr. Morris has to say about this one. It says it was perhaps inevitable that a show based in Baltimore would pay tribute to the most famous author from the city, Edgar Allan Poe. Considering that Poe's dark writings are a good fit with the mood, as well as the fact he wrote the first American detective story, it's only surprising that it took them until season 4 to pay tribute to him. Adding to the episode's creativity package is that the episode focuses on underused characters Munch and Howard, giving Richard Belzer his most memorable showcase in a while. The case is far from typical for the Homicide crew to begin with. Given an incredibly vague lead on the location of a dead body who was murdered 10 years ago, the two detectives find the dead man walled up in the basement of a building in a church. With no leads and precious little evidence, Munch and Howard eventually track down a bizarre suspect, Joseph Cordero, an ear for poetry and a man with a major shine to Edgar Allan Poe. Indeed, the well-read viewer will recognize that the nature of the murder is very similar to the classic Poe story, A Cask of Amontillado. Considering the dark nature of the case, as well as that of Poe's writing, Munch understands the nature of this man and becomes rather heavily involved in getting Cordero. Indeed, G notes that Munch hasn't been this vigilant about a murder for a very long time. Munch shows a tenacity that we don't normally associate with him going after the killer. This leads to a confrontation in the box between the detectives and Cordero, and a memorable performance by Kevin Conway. The two of them go after the poet with an unusual prop for them, a tape recording of a human heartbeat slowly getting faster. Despite the fact that he is clearly unsettled, he does not confess to the murder. However, even though he doesn't confess, Munch and Howard do break him. Immediately after the confrontation, Cordero begins tearing his walls and floors apart, looking for the sound of the heartbeat. Eventually, he walls himself back in the very same place the murder victim was interred, with only a small candle and some lines of poetry for company. This may not be realistic, but it is very unsettling nevertheless. Even if the case wasn't as interesting as it is, the episode would be worth the time because it gives Belzer and Leo a chance in the spotlight. Here again, we see the contradictory parts of Kay Howard's personality. First, we see her superstitious nature, first noticed in Ghost of a Chance way back in season 1 on seeing a black cat. Then we see her frustration at the illogic of the crime and the nature of their main suspect, memorably expressed by her as diarrhea of the mouth. We also see that despite her promotions, she is still good murder police. However, Belzer is at the focus of the episode, professionally and personally. The perpetually lovelorn Munch has fallen in love again, this time with medical examiner Dyer, played, of course, by Belzer's real-life spouse, Harley McBride. Howard mocks Munch for his attitude in general, but he seems genuine until he goes to pick up Dyer for their date and ends up having sex with a roommate mere minutes after having met her. As he puts it, "I'm a weak man." He spends the rest of the episode agonizing over his indiscretion and avoiding Dyer until the end of the episode, where he apparently tells her, and she slugs him in the eye. Surprisingly, Munch is upbeat by this, claiming it gives them a fresh start, but we're pretty sure that this relationship, like all of Munch's, is doomed. We also hear again that Munch has been married and divorced twice. By the end of the season, the number will I'll avoid that spoiler. Okay, even though Munch and Howard are at the focus, we also get a very memorable comic sequence in which Bayless tries to convince Pemberton to be happy about his wife's pregnancy. Unfortunately, in doing so, he ends up telling Captain Russert, and by the end of the episode, everybody in the squad knows. They all give positive and congratulatory remarks, none of which Frank hears because he is so pissed by what Tim has done. This is all very funny, but it does have a serious undertone, as Frank tells Tim that he is one of the few, for that matter, probably only a second person that he's ever trusted with a secret. Now Tim has violated his confidence. He does eventually get over this, but it is more because of outside events, not a change in Frank's nature. Heartbeat is not a perfect episode, but the quality of the acting and the rare fine mixture of comedy, drama, and suspense make it one of the better examples of the old school Homicide. However, the brief period of respite from the spectacular is just about to disappear. We are about to enter a more sensational period in the show's history, which, while interesting, is far from perfect. My score 9. So that's what he had to say. Ben, what do you have to say?
I say that the actor that played the poet could have been a bit better. I like the line. He didn't actually say it at this moment, but this is what he referred to. I liked it when Munch said, "That's him before Jenny Craig."
Yeah.
Now, how do you spell Jenny Craig's name? Surname?
Craig, I think.
Right, in England they would pronounce that Craig. I think. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But I pronounced it the American way, just so that people would know what I mean. Right. I like the... Now, initially, what I thought, the way you pitched the episode to me about the black cat, I initially thought that maybe that was a device for some extroverted intuition, like lots of coincidences.
I don't actually remember mentioning the black cat, but anyway, go ahead.
No, you didn't mention the black cat, but you did say that this might be an extroverted intuition type plot.
Oh, I said I think it's one, yeah, that of Homicide episodes, in types might enjoy more than some other ones.
Yeah, and because lots of people see that as sort of like random connections, I thought maybe the black cat, the way it was set up at the start, I thought, the black cat might be a way to explain random coincidences as like bad luck. I thought that maybe the cat was like going to be a narrative device. Because you can have coincidences in a plot if the coincidences are like negative things. So that's what I thought it would be, but it didn't turn out to be that. Yeah, I lost a little bit of sympathy for Munch when he shagged his roommates. Was it the older woman that is his real life wife?
Yes.
Like the medical examiner. Yeah, so that tape recorder, do they usually tape the interrogations?
Well, they don't show it very often, if they do.
But do you think that they do?
I don't know.
Because in other cop shows, I see them that they do record the interviews.
Yeah, in some shows, they make a big deal about times that they are recording versus when they're not. I mean, NYPD Blue had episodes, so I've been rewatching that lately, in the first season where they were videotaping confessions and things like that, but it wasn't something they were constantly doing in terms of the recording.
Right. Oh, yes. Oh, I've got to remember what I put in there here now. Right. Something about this woman. Hair. But this actress' hair, I know it's hard to tell on the quality of the video, but she had the line, "I reported him missing 10 years ago." Right, and I wrote down, what was that when you were 15? Because she does look rather young.
She looks like she could be early 30s.
Yeah, it's hard for me to tell because, like, the quality of the video that I was looking at, it would be hard to see whether she was just like a good-looking, like a woman over 30 that had aged well.
Yeah, well, I'd say this, like, you know, how I pointed out the realism of having the teenagers with acne in the last episode. In this episode, we have somebody who is working in like a... So she's obviously got access to the materials to make herself look younger.
Yes, very good.
It's her area.
Oh, yes, and then I put, you know, when they were talking about Munch being weird.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of late, I've been talking to quite a few ENFPers. And I've written here, weird, Munch is an ISTJ compared to an ENFP.
Yes, Munch appears weird in the environment of Homicide because so much of it is very censor-oriented in terms of it's very factual and about the bottom line of things, and Munch serves as the person who points out the ideas of things, which is why, again, I said that, you know, you might like this episode better because we talked about how Blake Seven, you know, you liked the ideas and things, and there were definitely a lot of that presented, and Munch is the character who most often does that in terms of presenting ideas that aren't necessarily specific to the situation.
And this Edgar Allan Poe guy, I need to read his stuff because he's actually one of the few poets that I actually think, actually, this guy's good. Because most of it's just nonsense.
So
poetry.
Were you not familiar with the Telltale Heart then?
Oh, no.
Okay, so that see, that obviously was a big factor in the episode because you asked why they were doing the heartbeat thing.
Yeah.
That there were two sort of main. Obviously, there was a bunch of sort of woven in, but there were two main Edgar Allan Poe stories that were heavily a part of this. One was the one that review mentioned of A Cask of Amontillado. That's the one where the guy walled himself up. But A Telltale Heart is the one where the guy killed somebody and buried him under the floor, and then kept hearing the heartbeat until it drove him crazy.
Ah.
So that's where that came from.
All I remember about Edgar Allan Poe is that when they did that Simpsons episode, and I actually thought that, you see, I thought that the Simpsons guys, I thought, this is really good. This is good stuff. Because most poetry is just like, oh god, INFP stuff.
Yeah, that was The Raven, was the one they did for Simpsons. And the only thing I didn't like about that was that Homer's voice was especially kind of mumbly, and it didn't. That part when his lines didn't really fit when they're juxtaposed with James Earl Jones reading in his usual style, which is great.
So he was Homer Mumbleston in that episode.
Yeah, so like the lines he reads sound kind of crappy in comparison. Dan Castellaneta is a great actor and does good voices, but the way he read Homer's lines in that, it took it away from it a little bit. But other than that, I thought it was good. But yeah, back to Homicide. I knew that you'd have some things to say about some of the things in the episode, but I didn't know, because we never talked about it before, how familiar you were with Edgar Allan Poe's work. So obviously that sort of changes perception when you're not aware of those particular things. But I figured you'd have some things to say about Munch's relationships and especially that the part at the end where after he gets punched, he's more turned on by the doctor than ever before. Wants to win him back.
You see, usually that's something that's more associated with NJs than NPs, because usually with NPs is, to be honest, they like to be looked after. And so Victor calls on the infantiles because they've not really got it going on. I mean, Jeff, you've been in the relationship with an ENFP.
I have, yes.
And you've said something about who exactly was the adult in that relationship.
Yeah, but I think what we see in Munch is you see some of that too, in terms of he when he's talking to his fellow detectives, he tries to come off as sort of like, well, he's the intellectual guy that brings up the ideas. But then in his relationships, that is like where he seems the most childlike, where he even says like he says all men are like this, of course, because he claims himself to be how all men are. They're slaves to their passions, and they just do what they feel like, and they can't control themselves. And so it's like he is to a point kind of infantile, and that he sort of looks at it as like he's just the wicked little boy doing what he's supposed to do.
It's almost like, because the NE DOMs are almost like abstract artisans in terms of their P-ness, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I had an ENTP guy tell me that he envied ESTPs because he said something to the effect of, I want to just be able to go to a party and just enjoy myself instead of listening to people's conversations and like deconstructing everything they're talking about.
Yeah, NTPs do not need to learn the meta model, because we already do that. We already deconstruct people's language in a brilliant way and totally alienate ourselves. And so I don't do it anymore. Right. Trying to think of... Oh, yeah, I mean, so you can definitely see that Munch is an EP, shall we say, in this. Yeah, I lost it. I know he was guilty afterwards, but I did lose a little bit of respect for the character when he did shag the housemate.
Yeah.
But it's sort of made up for that with like him being like guilt-ridden about it.
Yeah, it's obviously a recurring thing in the episode is the idea of guilt and, something tearing you up over, something you've done,
But
which, as we've established, is the difference somewhat between artisans and the other temperaments is that we're the least likely, I think, to experience guilt over things we
yeah,
did. Well, but we still can have a fear of getting caught. It's usually
right.
more about that. If we have anxiety about something we did, it's usually because we think someone has found out about it, and there's going to be consequences. But it's less about any kind of guilt over actually doing the action.
Right. I suppose this is the right point to talk about because we're 4 seasons in. How much exact character development of Munch have I actually missed? Because I've not seen much character development of Munch. I must have a memory like one of those straining things. Did you see much development Munch? Development Munch. Any much development for Munch?
Development in Munch. Well, I think he has had certain experiences on the show that have probably taught him some lessons. So he's developed in that sense, I guess. I think probably the experience of having the cops shot around him, made an impact on him. That seemed to sort of make him look at things slightly differently. But that as I've said, he was already sort of the guy who's kind of pointing out the different angles of things. So in a sense, he was already doing that, but maybe it got more personal then, rather than pointing out to other people, well, have you thought about this and this? It's kind of like it focused him more on himself. But I think the thing is the recurring thing with Munch is it seems like he sort of has this way of pointing out sort of the foibles of life and in other people, but when he's talking about himself, he almost gets very like self-deprecating, where he looks at his own life as sort of a series of tragedies.
Could it also be that that is already like a veteran detective? He's already pretty much been developed because like he's been through all this stuff before. So
yeah, to a point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he learns things, and I think as the show goes on, there will be more opportunities. There'll be episodes that he's confronted with sort of his religious history, and some of those aspects will come out.
Do you think because I think he's slightly improved as an actor. Do you think they start to think, okay, we can give him a bit more?
Yeah, I think probably of the actors, he probably was the one who develops the most over the course of the show, because he wasn't really an actor when it started. So that Andre Braugher, obviously, like episode 1, he's like he's right in there, but Munch, it takes a little time to warm up. But I think by this point in the show, Belzer was obviously more comfortable, I think, in playing the part. And it was good to have an episode here because it had been a little while since he'd really kind of been featured in something. So it was good to have some more Munch time, as you said, you were desiring as well.
Yes. I did think though that in the first season he had better Munch lines.
Well, 2 things I would say. One, some of the original Munch stuff was just things out of Belzer's stand-up act, so it was sort of like he was able to be very natural in doing those parts because they were just sort of working in his own material. But obviously there were some lines written, and of course the original, the first episode was adapted very much from the book and a lot of those first cases. So some of the dialogue was right out of the book, and the actual person that Munch is based on, Sergeant J. Landsman.
I do think that the cases in the first season required more brain power from the audience than they do after that.
That's probably partially true, and I think, as Mr. Morris pointed out, the network, kind of messed with things, as we've talked about before, and tried to tell the show, don't make things too complicated for the audience, kind of thing. make it easier to follow. So they had to somewhat comply with that. The other thing I was going to say that hurt Munch as a character was not having Bolander, because they had a lot of very good exchanges, and so that partnership definitely is missed when it's no longer there.
Because it enabled them to talk about things from the past, and
yeah, and it was a good personality mix in that you had Bolander very much as the ISTJ, facts are facts, things are just the way they are, and Munch always trying to introduce the other ideas into things, and Bolander being very resistant to any of that, having a very much reality-based perspective. So they served it to contrast each other well, which there's still a little of that with Howard, but not to the same extent, because she's not as much the stick in the mud that Bolander was. So she's a little bit more open-minded to things than he was. So you don't get quite as much of that contrast. But
I don't think Bolander was a stick in the mud. He liked to have some festivities when it was like Christmas and stuff. Like,
well, yeah, I just mean in terms of he would shoot down Munch's ideas most of the time. Like, what are you talking about? Don't be weird, kind of thing. It was his reaction to all the stuff Munch said. He was the one who sort of grounded the partnership in reality. And as we've established with Howard, is she's got some superstitions and things, so she's a little bit less that way.
I think I'll give the episode about a 9.
Cool. It's like you liked it quite a bit then.
Well, I do like Edgar Allan Poe, even though I've not read Edgar Allan Poe. But what I've heard, I've liked, because most poetry, in my opinion, is just so superficial.
Yeah. I wrote a bunch of lyrics, poetry, if you want to call it that. Yep. But I don't really enjoy reading that many other people's. Like, just reading them. I like songs. I like song lyrics, listening to songs as music. Reading the lyrics themselves, usually when I do that, it's more to pick something apart if I think the lyrics are stupid. Or just, there's something to them that's sort of mockable is really more how I look about it. But yeah, just reading like a bunch of, particular poet that never really interested me much. So the times in school where we had to do that were pretty boring most of the time.
Although a good poem...
Poe was a weirdo, but I did kind of appeal to some of his stories, some of his things. I remember with a Cask of Amontillado, we actually had a assignment in English class where we had to sort of write our own version of it, I think. I think we had to come up with some sort of story that basically had the same theme or the same ideas present. So, and I don't remember the details of it, but I remember doing that. So,
no, the teacher weren't exactly going easy on you there.
No, they weren't.
Yeah, that was an English teacher actually probably stretching the students.
Yeah, she wasn't very popular. But yeah, there were some things that were all right,
Did you call Edgar Allan Poe a weirdo?
Yeah, I did call him a weirdo. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
He was probably an N.
Probably.
Yeah.
Even though I've never read the bits that I've heard, probably. Yes.
Yeah, like my gut instinct, is to say NF. Although I guess he could have been an NT, but I'm thinking probably an F. But he might have been closer to the borderline than some.
Borderline NF. You make it sound like a case. I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry, Mrs. Weathers. Your son has been diagnosed with borderline NF.
That's something like Mike from NF Geeks would definitely, say it would go along those lines. He said things like that similar, but Yeah, no, I just think of somebody. I've talked about my mother before, who's an INFJ, but she's close to the middle on the TF line, so she's, maybe has some qualities.
Ooh, when I've heard her, initially she has a lot of positive emotions. Sort of she gives that off initially before she gets upset.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why, I've talked about the validity that I do give somewhat to, the idea of the Jungian functions, even though I may get irritated at people relying too much on those and trying to.
As do I.
But I can still say that I do see some validity to it when I see it in life. The difference between, somebody, if you look at it from just a pure perspective, the letters of Myers-Briggs, and you say, well, introvert and my mother's an introvert, so in public I would be the one more comfortable talking to people if you just looked at it from that perspective. But what I pointed out is I think those that are extroverted feeling more as a base, so that they're actually more comfortable at initiating conversations with strangers than somebody who is not, even though maybe an extrovert in terms of preference.
Yeah.
I am not good at just like starting things with strangers, and she's better at that than me. Though she may not want to talk at length with people. That's the difference. Is like I want to talk at length with people, but I don't. When it comes to something like stopping and asking somebody for directions, that's not something I like doing. I know that people make jokes that's just a male thing, but it really isn't entirely that. There are plenty of males that really don't mind that, and plenty of females who don't like it any more than I do. So, but my mother will do that kind of thing because it's like that initial, greeting of people and sort of exchange of information. It's like she's more comfortable with sort of the pleasantries of doing that sort of initiation of conversation. Whereas I'm not as comfortable with that. But once I had established, talking to a person, I would want to talk with them a lot more than she would.
Yeah.
Because I would engage, and then I'd get, energized by the conversation and want to get to know the person more. Whereas in her case, it's just like she's getting information from them, and she has a method to do that.
Right.
So
basically, I'll just give the audience a little bit of functional stuff, and then we can end it and get to like 7. Yeah. So basically, it's this function here. What Dario Nardi calls this the 6th function. This one. And this can monkey around with the functions in. So, for instance, you have MBTI people saying, "Oh, ESFPs don't have FE, ENFPs don't have FE." If you meet them in real life, they do.
Well, anybody who just says they don't have whatever doesn't know what they're talking about.
Because if you think about
because to the extent that these functions exist, everybody has all of them. They just don't use them in the same degree in the same ways.
It's like ESTPs can be very good at extroverted thinking. But so, for instance, it makes sense though that if someone is an extrovert and if someone is a feeler, then they're going to be good at extroverted feeling. They might not value it, but they're going to be good at it because they're an extrovert, they're directed outwards, and they're concerned with feelings. Make sense?
As I said before, it kind of depends on what you mean by good at it to me.
Well, so for instance, the way the ESFP can use emotional expressiveness and charm to make them the center of attention, or the way an ENFP can use emotional expressiveness and charm to like bring people to their cause, or to
like what I was saying about my mother, who's an INFJ, is that she's better at initiating conversations that way, though. That's what I'm saying. I'm not good at that.
Yeah, I mean it's used in a different way, though. I mean, like I said, it's used in order to. But I think that's more a case of like. It's like, I know what you're saying. It's like because it's like they know the sort of like the dance to play. They know the steps. in the sort of ritual of talking to people, of initiating those sort of things. Whereas you're very much like 100% improviser. So you probably don't want this thing where it's like you go up to someone and say this set thing, because that goes against your whole nature. And you very much.
It's not that I don't
want to react to what they say.
I want to talk to people. It's just that it's hard for me to.
You're a counterpuncher.
I'm not as comfortable. Yeah, I'm not as comfortable with like that. You know, initiating conversation to get information from someone. That part, like, because then it seems more like a business transaction to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not as comfortable with business transactions. I like personal, laid back. You know, there's no pressure to find out something. You're just talking to somebody. I like that better.
Yeah.
But to bring it back to Homicide.
Yes.
This episode, I found myself even not. I haven't been in the specific situation that Pendleton was in this episode in terms of the specific news that he had or the bailiff was. But the situation itself, from a general sense, I very much have been in. And I understand because everybody else is looking at this as, why is Pendleton keeping this a secret, including Bayless? And I understand. Well, it's hard for me to put into words why, but I know what Pendleton was feeling on both sides of it. Like both.
So do I.
About the betrayal of it, but also like why he didn't want to talk about this. And, you know, one you would say, well, wouldn't an ESFP want to share this because they want to be the center of attention? The thing is, Pendleton wants to be the center of attention in ways that he has control over, in ways where he's comfortable with the type of situation because where he feels at ease. You know, as we've said before, like his element, his area is the box. You know, he can exist in other areas and he can do well, but that's the area where he really shines and feels like he's most himself. And it's not surprising, you know, as the ESFP is known as a performer, that it is like a performance, and he has his own performance style, and he can do that. When he's put in a situation where the attention is sort of coming from this position where, as we've talked about, Guardians have this kind of reaction of, oh, you're supposed to have these reactions to certain things. Oh, somebody announces that their wife is pregnant. Well, you know, you're supposed to make this particular deal about it, and you're supposed to get them a card, or you're supposed to do there's all of these supposed tos. And Pendleton doesn't want those kind of phony reactions from people. Genuine sentiment he doesn't have a problem with, which is like when Bayless has expressed a personal sentiment of congratulations and stuff, Pendleton actually responded well to that. But he didn't want the secret shared because he knew that there'd be a lot of this sort of phony attention where people felt obligated to tell him things or give him advice that he didn't want to hear. Like a G, of course, is the one that starts the Guardian sage advice about it, and Pendleton's just like, I do not want to talk about this.
Oh, yeah, I mean, and of course, when he's in the box, he's using the FE, or whatever to say, emotional expressiveness, the ability to project emotion as a means to an end.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's not that, you know, on one perspective you'd say, well, it seems like Pendleton is shy. And yeah, in a sense, in a way, he is.
Yeah, he is.
And he says in the episode to Bayless that he doesn't have that many friends. And again, another reason I love the character and for stereotype busting purposes is because those people who try to, you know, to project this, well, ESFP is always this shallow party animal character. And see, that's why he's such a great character I can point to say, here is someone who is not that stereotype. And if you looked at from, you know, a surface level stereotype angle, you would say he doesn't fit this. But if you really watch and pay attention to his character,
his motivations,
he does fit it. And he's a great example of someone who you see it come out in all these different things. But if you look at it from this surface level, you say, well, you know, he's not going along with these stereotypes because he doesn't seem to want attention. He doesn't have a lot of friends. But it's because the motivation he has, you know, he has the very specific ideas of what he wants to be in control of. And I understand exactly how that feels, because when I am in my element, I can go for miles, as they say.
Yeah.
But when I'm not, I can become very uncomfortable with things directed at me if I don't know if I don't feel like I can react in a way that, you know, I'm directing it in a sense.
Yeah, and he also has a lot, and what we've seen with him is he has a lot of ethics. He has a lot of very personal.
Yeah, I mean, he's been described by some writers as being a tortured character because he, you know, he has these things where he brings up about his faith or lack thereof that kind of haunt him in some ways. As he's on this job where he sees the evil deeds of men,
Yeah.
and of human beings, and he reconciles that with what he grew up learning about.
Right.
You know, about the purposes of life and the worth of human dignity and all that sort of thing. And so he's always wrestling with these sort of competing things that are evidence, you know, all around him as he does his job and lives his life.
So, talking of stereotype, he is also like classically educated because he had the Jesuit education, so he can speak Latin and Greek. He at least understands it.
Yeah, so that's why I think it's a great character and one I related to a lot, even if the specifics of his life weren't the same as mine. I was right there with him in lots of situations.
Right. And when you did your fantastic video, ESFP preference versus reality, it's like you were saying the circumstances are different, but all the motivations, you know, you tick those boxes in the Kersey profile.
Right, and that's. That if nothing else that I get across to people in the videos I make, that would be the thing is that.
Oh, does Frank tick those boxes as well? That's in the Kersey profile.
You know, I haven't like gone in and done like a line by line examination of that, but yeah, in a lot of ways, sure. I mean, I think you definitely see evidence of that, and actually that kind of. I knew before I got into stuff about typology, I remembered, of course, that I related to Pembleton a lot. And when I was rewatching Homicide, I really wasn't even thinking about it from those terms. I remembered, obviously, that I liked the character and related to him. But I didn't start watching the show with this idea of, Frank has got to be the same personality type as me. Like, I didn't even actually think about that, really, when I started watching it again. And in fact, before I actually watched it, I think when the topic got brought up of the show, and I sort of just kind of thought in my head, sort of drive-by typings of characters from what I remembered, I might have even said, like, oh, Pembleton might be like an ISTP or something when I first thought about it. Because I was just thinking in terms of, again, sort of the stereotypes of the actions and what they, you know, represent as detectives. I was thinking, well, you know, he would be described by a lot of people as being a thinker because the way they look at that is somebody who's talking a lot about like ideas of things or bringing up, you know, philosophical issues or things like that, you know. And, you know, I sort of had that stereotype in my head of like, well, these police detectives, cops, they tend to be like sort of STP type people, so, you know, some STJs, but like, you know, this is kind of the stereotype on that. And so I really hadn't thought about it much. That was just sort of a casual thing I might have thought of. And then when I started watching the show again, it started just coming out so obviously in Pembleton. It was the first time I really watched it from that lens, where I was like, oh my gosh, he's an SFP.
Yeah, and also, because they contrasted him a lot with Daniel Baldwin character, who was STP.
Right. So you saw the you know, a great example of like the two sides of the SP coin, you know, in terms of the way they looked at things.
And in the first episode, you saw the rattling at each other. I think Daniel, I think Felton, he rattled Pembleton more than Pembleton rattled him, because you know, STP is not necessarily as sensitive as the SFPs.
Yeah, and that's the thing is he seems to be enjoying it more.
Yeah.
The fact that he can kind of needle Frank about stuff.
An STP enjoying needling people.
Yeah. But he's also like, he starts before you even see Pembleton. Felton in the first episode is kind of mocking him about like what he wears and things like that.
And you can see the way it's performed. Like Frank is getting all perturbed and like, Oh gosh, Felton is like he's enjoying it. He's smiling away. He's enjoying ribbing him.
Yeah. Yeah, but then they have those great moments where you see sort of breakthroughs in terms of them understanding each other a little better, like in that the episode where they were searching all the car lots for the car.
So Jeff, this is the Munch story, isn't it, rather than the Pendleton story? Although he was part of it, though. He was part of this episode.
Right. So I brought that up. I wanted to make sure I talked about that before we ended this review because it was another episode, even though Pendleton wasn't really the focus of the episode. Obviously, I related to his story more than I did Munch's. You know, Munch can talk about, well, all men are like whatever, but they're obviously I know better. And I can't say that I've never been in a situation where I was attracted to where I had a serious relationship and I was attracted to someone else who was somehow related to them, because that has happened to me, in fact. But I was, in fact, able to show more self-discipline than Munch did in this episode. So.
Yeah, it's just that after a while, all this stuff about Munch with his relationships, it's like when he was talking about Felicio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a little repetitive.
Yeah, well, there will obviously be more to come with that, but there will be some different angles on it. It won't be exactly the same, so we'll see some further exploration of that, and even some voices from the past, you might say.
Excellent. So now we can end and then watch Blake 7.
All right. So you said you gave it a 9. I think this might. I think it might have been. I can't remember if there was an episode you actually rated higher than me of Homicide than us before, but I would give it about an 8. So I liked it quite a bit, but slightly lower ranked, but still quite enjoyable. And I think watching it again, I sort of enjoyed it maybe a little more, anticipating that you might get some enjoyment out of it. And so that kind of actually made me appreciate certain things maybe more than I would have.
Yeah, it also wasn't. But I did start to. It wasn't as grim, this one.
Yeah, I did start to drift a little bit more in this one than watching it than I did in the previous one. It was a lot more emotionally gripping. So, but anyway, all right. So that's that. And because of the out of order of it, I momentarily have gone blank on what the next episode is.
So,
but I'm scrolling back here so I can check that before I.
So, Jeff, do you think that because the ones I've watched so far on my torrent are in order, do you think it's sort of established that it will be in proper order?
I hope so. I mean, it seems like it would make sense for that to be the case, but
yeah.
Well, that's why I was looking to see what the next episode was, so I could see,
what?
Whether or not it was going to line up with.
Right. So, do you think we should end it now, so that the audience doesn't go through this riveting bit of finding what the title is?
Well, it's not going to take me that long. I figure you can say something for 20 seconds or so.
Okay. Oh yes, Elwyn is written on the board in blue rather than black or red. Is that to signify it's a cold case?
Yeah, I did say that earlier in the in the review video, but this one was kind of long, so I could see how you.
Well, just as we make allowances for Morgan being an ESTP, allowances for me being an M and having a memory like a sieve.
Yes, that is indeed what that means. That the case is more than a year old, I believe, is when it turns into blue. Okay, so the next episode is actually entitled Hate Crimes.
Did you say hate crimes or hate?
Hate.
Oh,
H-A-T-E.
no. See, so, I'd have liked it more. I hope it's not one of them political things. I would have liked it a bit more if it was called Heat Crimes.
I would not say it's political. I would say there's some social commentary, maybe.
Yeah.
But not political. And it contains one of my favorite scenes that is not actually related to the plot that makes the episode called Hate Crimes. But there's another subplot, and it contains a scene that I enjoy very much. So
yeah,
I'll just leave it.
The thing is with Hate Crimes, it's like, well, if you just changed it to unjustified, it's not like then ranking things, you know, like according to motive. Because it's like somebody could be killed for a hateful reason that it doesn't get to be classified, and it's like, what am I, chopped liver compared to this other reason?
Yeah, I would say that the title is not, it's not really satire, but the episode is not focused on like either political or legal technicalities of such things.
Yeah.
So, but it's well done. Again, I think in terms of what it is, there's some interesting things brought up. But again, like Homicide's true style, it leaves you with a little bit of discomfort in some areas.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll obviously talk about that more next time. So, and it's another one directed by an actor who's somewhat well known, Peter Weller. So anyway,
is that RoboCop?
That's RoboCop. Yes.
Oh.
So we'll join us next time, folks, for Homicide: Hate Crimes.
Ooh. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.